Hello everybody, and this is chapter 2 of the ServSafe coursebook. It's understanding the micro world. So what this chapter is about, it's about pathogens, which are bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi that can get you sick after you consume it by eating food. So what are these pathogens? So pathogens are microorganisms, and these microorganisms are small living organisms that can only be seen with a microscope. So they're so tiny that you need a microscope. Even if you have billions and billions of these microorganisms, you will still need a microscope because they're still so tiny. So what is a pathogen? It is a harmful microorganism because there's good microorganisms and there's bad. These ones can get you sick. And it makes people sick when eaten or produces toxins that can cause illness. So some of these things, fish toxin, fish can have these toxins in their body. However, when we eat them, we get sick because we are not fish. And what is a toxin? A toxin is a poison, and then it can get you sick. So like I said, there are 4 different pathogens that can contaminate food and cause people to get sick with a foodborne illness or food poisoning, or it's more likely called. So there's bacteria, there's viruses, parasites, and fungi. So how can these contamination happen? Well, there's a lot of different ways. So mostly it's food handlers by their lack of personal hygiene. So they can contaminate food when they don't wash their hands after using the bathroom, which is very bad. They are in contact with a person who is sick, and as we learned during COVID, everybody who is sick does not look sick, or they might not have any symptoms. They sneeze or vomit onto food or food contact surfaces, which are tables, stirring utensils, cutting boards, etc. They touch dirty food contact surfaces and equipment and then touch food. And then, for example, food handlers who do not wash their hands after using the restroom may contaminate food and surfaces with their feces from their fingers. This route is called the fecal-oral route of contamination. So when you don't wash your hands or your fingers and you touch food and then that food is then consumed, it can result in a foodborne illness and potentially someone getting sick. So simple mistakes can cause contamination, very, very simple mistakes. So allowing ready-to-eat food to touch a surface that contained or contacted raw meat, poultry, or seafood. As you can see in this picture, you have lettuce, which is classified as a ready-to-eat food because you don't cook lettuce. And then you have raw chicken on the same cutting board with the same knife. So raw chicken can contain non-typhoidal salmonella, otherwise known as chicken salmonella, and it can get that lettuce contaminated. Storing food or cleaning supplies incorrectly, and then failing to spot signs of pests. Usually for pests, you'll see droppings, their urine glows under a black light, you can see gnaw markings or little small chew holes, or maybe even a trail back to their nests. So, symptoms of a foodborne illness, there's a lot of them. So there is diarrhea, there's vomiting, fever, nausea, abdominal cramps, and jaundice. And jaundice is a yellowing of the skin and the eyes. So as you can see, there's nausea and vomiting. They coincide with each other, but they can also be different. Someone can just feel nauseous where they feel like they have to vomit, but then other symptoms is an actual person vomiting. So onset times, it varies between what type of foodborne illness that you have. So it can range from 30 minutes after eating the food to up to 6 weeks after eating the food. So it's very important if you get diagnosed with a foodborne illness, especially a seafood toxin, you remember the last time you ate seafood because that could be the last time you got sick. So there's something called big 6 pathogens. These 6 pathogens are what's making people most sick most of the time. So there's Salmonella typhi, there's Shigella spp, there's non-typhoidal salmonella, which is usually from chickens. There's the sugar-producing E. coli, so it's known as E. coli, hepatitis A, and norovirus. 4 of these are bacteria, which is the first 4, and the last 2 are viruses. Like I said, these are the 6 that get people most sick. So the big 6 pathogens are found in very high numbers in a person's feces, and that person is usually sick. They can be transferred to food very easily, and the person does not have to eat much of it to get sick, and they can get very severe sickness from that. And a person can be severely sick from small doses from any of the big six, and they should not work in a food service operation while they are sick. So if you're sick, you have vomiting, you have diarrhea, you have any of those symptoms we just talked about, you should stay home. Because if you work with a high-risk population, those people can get sick very, very easily. All right, so general information about bacteria, the location. They are found almost everywhere. Detection, they cannot be seen, smelled, or tasted. They can only be seen with a microscope. The growth, they grow rapidly in conditions that are correct, which we'll talk about in a few moments. Toxin production, they can produce toxins as they grow and die, and people who eat the toxins will get sick, and then cooking cannot destroy them. How can you prevent this? So the best way and the most important way to prevent bacteria from spreading is by controlling time and temperature. So there are 6 conditions where bacteria need to grow, and all these conditions need to get met in order for that. So the acronym is FAT-TOM. So you have food, acidity, temperature, time, oxygen, and moisture. Remember, FAT-TOM. So food, most bacteria needs nutrients to survive. Like most things in the world, they need to have a fuel source. This fuel source is the food from carbohydrates and proteins. And then TCS foods usually support this growth of bacteria better than any types of food. So TCS means time and temperature controlled for safety. Acidity, so bacteria grows really well in foods that contain little or no acid. So a 7.5 to a 4.6 on the pH scale is very ideal. If you can see in the picture, it's close to neutral without going over neutral to alkaline. And some of these foods with that ideal pH are bread, raw chicken, cantaloupes, milk, cooked corn, cooked rice products, pasta. Temperature. So bacteria grow rapidly in the temperature danger zone, which is 41 to 135. Bacteria grows even more rapidly from 70 degrees to 125. This is a zone where you want to make sure food stays out of the most, because bacteria will even double more in this time. So bacterial growth is limited when food is held above or below this danger zone. So you want to keep hot food hot above 135, and you want to keep cold food cold under 41, and then of course you want to keep frozen food frozen. Time. Bacteria needs time to grow. So the longer bacteria and the food stays in the temperature danger zone, the longer it has to make and grow into unsafe levels. If we consume those unsafe levels, we are going to get sick. Oxygen. This is a weird one where some need it to grow, some do not need it to grow. And then some bacteria that grow without oxygen can occur in cooked rice, untreated garlic and oil mixture. So that's when you just put garlic and oil in a container and not pasteurize it. And then temperature of used baked potatoes. Moisture. Bacteria grow well in food with high levels of moisture. So this is called an AW scale or a water activity scale. And then the amount of moisture available in food for bacterial growth is the definition of water activity. So that the scale goes from 0.0 to 1.0, and water has the highest at 1.0 because water is the most wet. Any food with a water activity level over a 0.85 or higher is the best option for bacterial growth. So think of cut tomatoes, cut melons, cut leafy greens, sprouts, tofu. All of that is very high in moisture content foods. The conditions that you can control as food handler are time and temperature. So time being limit the amount of time that food spends in the temperature danger zone. And for temperature is, like I said a few moments ago, keep hot foods hot, cold foods cold, and keep all TCS foods out of the danger zone. Because obviously if you have cookies, those can be stored at room temperature, and room temperature is usually right in the middle of the temperature danger zone. But hot food hot, cold food cold. Bacterial growth, this is the stages of bacterial growth. So lag is when it's waiting for favorable conditions, so all those conditions of Fat Tom. The log stage is when all of those are met and bacteria just reproduce. Stationary is when they are growing and dying at a pace to keep even. And then death is when all of the Fat Tom conditions are no longer favorable and it starts to die off. Here are some stages of growth for Salmonella SPP cells. So if you can see, if it's at 42 degrees, it stays in one line. 44, it slowly goes up. 50, it goes up a little bit faster. And if it's stored at 95 degrees, it goes up within very, very fast. So spores. Spores are certain bacteria that can change into spores in order to keep from dying. So basically what this is you have your bacteria. It creates a protective coating when the conditions are not right. When these conditions are right, their protective coating kind of goes away and they produce more bacteria. So spores are often found in dirt. They can survive cooking temperatures and they can change back into that form like I talked about that grows when the conditions are favorable. There's a video. We do not have to watch it. It's a different video. And then most popular major foodborne bacteria. We're going to go ahead and talk about these, so I'm not going to talk about them right now. Controlling time and temperature can keep these bacteria from causing foodborne illness. Preventing cross-contamination can keep these ones from preventing foodborne illness. So non-typhoidal salmonella and salmonella typhi. So non-typhoidal salmonella, also known as chicken salmonella or salmonellosis. Common linked food is poultry and eggs, dairy, produce, so tomatoes, peppers, and cantaloupes. It is carried by farm animals, and most common symptoms are diarrhea, abdominal cramps, vomiting, and fever. Prevent cross-contamination. Cook chicken and eggs to minimum temperatures. Prevent cross-contamination between poultry and ready-to-eat food. And exclude food handlers who are vomiting and have diarrhea if they have been diagnosed with non-typhoidal salmonella from the operation. So let them stay home so your employees can get better. Salmonella typhi. Illness is typhoid fever. This is commonly linked to ready-to-eat food and beverages. It only lives in humans. Most common symptoms are high fever, weakness, abdominal pain, headache, loss of appetite, and rash. Once again, prevent cross-contamination, exclude these food handlers, let them stay home, make people wash hands, and make sure you cook food to minimum internal cooking temperatures. E. coli. So the illness is hemorrhagic colitis. It is linked to most commonly ground beef that's raw or undercooked, contaminated produce. The Shiga toxin producing E. coli can be found in the intestines of cattle and infected people. Eating only a small amount can make people sick. Once it's eaten, it produces toxins. Those toxins then live throughout the body and can be a part of the fecal oral route that we talked about earlier. Most common symptoms is you could have diarrhea that becomes bloody, which is always scary, have abdominal cramps, and in very severe cases, you could have kidney failure. Control time and temperature is the best prevention measure. Cook food, especially ground beef, to minimum temperatures. Purchase produce from approved suppliers. Prevent cross-contamination between raw meat and ready-to-eat food. And keep staff with diarrhea who have been diagnosed with E. coli out of the operation. Shigella, SPP, or shigellosis, it's contaminated by hands very easily. And salads containing TCS foods, so potato, tuna, shrimp, macaroni, or chicken salads. And food in contact with contaminated water, such as produce, also is a part of that. Most common symptoms are bloody diarrhea, abdominal pain and cramps, and you could have occasionally in fevers. Practice good personal hygiene. Exclude food handlers who have diarrhea and have been diagnosed with Shigella from the operation. Wash hands and control flies inside and outside the operation. Flies are the ones who transmit Shigella the most. Bacillus psoriasis, it's a diarrhea illness. It's commonly linked to cooked vegetables, meat products, and milk. Most common symptoms are watery diarrhea, and you will not have vomiting with this one. Bacillus psoriasis, which is a vomiting illness, there's two different ones. You could have from fried rice or rice pudding, and most common symptoms is they can turn into spores and then protect themselves. You could have nausea and vomiting. Control time and temperature, and cook food to minimum internal cooking temperatures. Hold food at the correct temperatures and cool food correctly. Listeria, and most commonly linked is to raw meat, ready-to-eat foods such as deli meat, hot dogs, and soft cheeses, and unpasteurized dairy products. So this is very important not to buy raw cow's milk. You need to buy pasteurized cow's milk. Most common symptoms in pregnant women, it could cause miscarriage. And in newborns, it could be sepsis, pneumonia, and meningitis. So these are very severe symptoms. Control time and temperature throughout any product that has passed its use-by or expiration date. Cook raw meat to the minimum temperatures. Prevent cross-contamination, and avoid using unpasteurized dairy products. Campylobacter jejuni, commonly linked food is poultry and water contaminated with the bacteria, meat, stews, and gravies. Most common symptoms are diarrhea, it could be watery and or bloody, abdominal cramps, fever, vomiting, and headaches. Control time and temperature, cook food to all minimum internal cooking temperatures, and prevent cross-contamination between raw, poultry, and ready-to-eat foods. Clostridium perfringens, sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but it's commonly linked to meat, poultry, and dishes made with meat and poultry, such as stews and gravies. Most common symptoms are diarrhea, and you can have severe abdominal pain. Once again, control time and temperature, cool and reheat food correctly, and hold food at correct temperatures. Clostridium botulism, incorrectly canned food, reduced oxygen packaging, so vacuum sealed foods, temperature abused vegetables such as baked potatoes, untreated garlic and oil mixtures. This can grow without oxygen, and if it's not treated correctly, death is likely. Initially, you could have nausea and vomiting, and later on, you could have weakness, you could get double vision, you could have difficulty speaking and swallowing. Control time and temperature, hold, cool, and reheat food correctly, and inspect any cans food for damage. So if you buy cans, you make sure the cans are not dented, they're not rusted, they're not leaking. If any of those happen to your canned food, you should not buy them, because microorganisms are small enough to go through a microscopic hole that you cannot see with your eye, and that is how it can grow. Staphylococcus aureus, commonly food is food requiring handling during preparation, so food that requires handling during prepping. Salads containing TCS foods, and it is found in the hair, nose, and throat of infected cuts on humans. Most common symptoms are nausea, vomiting, and, retching, and abdominal cramps. So that retching is dry heaving. Practice good personal hygiene. Wash hands, face, and wash your hands, particularly after touching your hair, face, or body. Cover wounds on the hands and arms, and hold, cool, and reheat food correctly. Major foodborne bacteria. Purchase food from approved reputable suppliers. can keep these bacteria from causing a foodborne illness. So Vibropharyngitis and I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce those. So these two are commonly linked foods are oysters and contaminated water, and most common symptoms are diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and nausea, vomiting, low-grade fever, and chills. So what a low-grade fever is just 1 or 2 degrees over what normal body temperature is. Most important is purchase food from approved suppliers and cook oysters to the minimum internal cooking temperatures. This will help kill any bacteria. If these are not met and you have this illness, you could likely die from them. It could cause death. Some general information about viruses. So location is they're carried by human beings and animals. They do require a living host to grow because they use your body as nutrition. They cannot grow in food. They can be transferred through food and remain infectious in food, but they do not grow in food. Sources are food and water or any contaminated surface, or typically through that fecal oral route we talked about earlier. Viruses can be transferred from person to person, people to food, and people to food contact surfaces. So if someone sneezes on someone else, someone sneezes on the food or coughs on the food, or if someone coughs or sneezes on the food contact surfaces, or touches anything. People carry this virus in their feces, and they can transfer them to their hands after using the restroom. Viruses cannot be destroyed by normal cooking temperatures. So they're not destroyed by normal cooking temperatures. If your food handlers have vomiting, diarrhea, or jaundice, you need to exclude them from working. So they need to stay home until they are cleared to work. You want to make sure everyone, especially food handlers, wash their hands the proper way as often as they can, and avoid bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods. Practicing these good personal hygienes can prevent hepatitis A and norovirus. Okay, so what is hepatitis A? So hepatitis A is a virus, and usually for viruses there are no cures. You have to let it run its course. They're linked to ready-to-eat food and shellfish from contaminated water. So these symptoms can be a mild fever, general weakness in your body, nausea, abdominal pain, and you could get jaundice, but it may appear later. Practice good personal hygiene. Exclude anyone who has hepatitis A. Exclude food handlers who have jaundice for 7 days or less from the operation. Wash your hands. Avoid bare contact with ready-to-eat food, and purchase foods from approved, reputable suppliers. Norovirus. This is the main one where people can get sick. This would be the most popular one, I guess. But it's highly contagious and is very easily spread. So they are linked to ready-to-eat food and shellfish from contaminated water. People who can get sick within a few hours after eating. Most common symptoms are vomiting, diarrhea, nausea, and abdominal cramps. Most important thing, once again, practice good personal hygiene. Wash your hands, wash your clothes, wash yourself. Exclude food handlers who have vomiting or diarrhea from the operation. Wash your hands, avoid bare hand contact with ready-to-eat foods, and once again, purchase shellfish from approved suppliers. You always want to purchase your food from approved suppliers. They have things in place that if something happens and the food is contaminated, they have a way to get it back and go through a process. Parasites is the third category of pathogens. So they do require a host to live and reproduce. Sources are seafood, wild game, and food processed with contaminated water. So produce can be one of those. Prevention. Purchase food from approved reputable suppliers. cook food to require minimum internal temperatures, and fish that will be served raw or undercooked has to be frozen correctly by the manufacturer. All sushi grade fish in America has been frozen, all of it. If you go to a restaurant and they say that we have fresh fish, never frozen, for raw fish sushi, it is a lie. It has to be frozen by law. Purchasing from approved suppliers can keep these parasites from causing any foodborne illnesses. Anasacasis simplex, Cryptosporidium parvum, Giardia duodenalis, and Cyclospora cantonensis. So anasacasis has raw and undercooked fish, so herring, cod, halibut, mackerel, and Pacific salmon. You could have tingling in the throat, and you could cough up worms. Purchase from approved suppliers. Cook fish to minimum internal cooking temperatures, and make sure the fish has been frozen if it's being served as sushi grade fish. Cryptosporidis is from contaminated water, and it can be linked to produce if it's used that contaminated water. You can get water diarrhea, abdominal cramps, nausea, and you could have weight loss. Purchase foods from approved suppliers. Use correctly treated water. Keep food handlers with diarrhea out of the operation, and make sure you wash your hands. Giardiasis, incorrectly treated water and produce. Initially you can get a fever, and then later on you can get diarrhea, abdominal cramps, and nausea. Once again, approved suppliers, correctly treated water. If you have diarrhea, make your food handler stay home and wash your hands. Cyclosporidium, incorrectly treated water, and this could be also for berries, lettuce, or basil. So most common symptoms are nausea, abdominal cramps. You could have a mild fever, which is a little bit higher than a low-grade fever. Diarrhea alternating with constipation, so you'll have to run to the bathroom and you might be able to go, but you might not be able to. Loss of weight and loss of appetite. Once again, approved suppliers. Purchase produce from those approved suppliers. If you have diarrhea, keep those food handlers out of your operation. Make them stay home, and continuously wash hands. Fungi. Sometimes it can make people sick. Sometimes it does not, honestly. It does. This is what spoils food, and there are two examples. So mold and yeast. So basic characteristics of mold is they spoil food and sometimes can cause illness. They can produce toxins. They grow well in almost any conditions, especially in acidic food with low water activity, and are only slowed but not destroyed by cooler freezer temperatures. This means if there is mold on something, even though you put it in the freezer, it can still grow. It will grow slowly, but it still grows. Prevention. Throw out all moldy food unless the mold is a natural part of the food. And if you're thinking, what mold is part of food, there's a couple things. Brie cheese has an outer layer of mold, which is edible. Blue cheese has the blue veins going through that cheese, which is also edible. Those are two molds that I know of off the top of my head right now that you can eat, and you will be fine. Basic characteristics of yeast. It can spoil food very quickly. It can produce a smell or taste of alcohol as it spoils food. It may look like a white or pink discoloration, or it could have slime or maybe bubbly. It grows well in acidic food with little moisture, and prevention is throw away any food containing yeast or that yeasty smell. You cannot save it. You cannot eat it. You will get sick. From here, there are also biological toxins. These biological toxins can be from seafood, from plants, and mushrooms. So seafood toxins cannot be seen or smelled or tasted. They cannot be destroyed by freezing or cooking. They're sources in fish, so they can be naturally occurring. They are pathogens. And if you think about this, there are predatory fish who eat smaller fish. and those smaller fish are the ones that eat the toxin. So since these fish live in the water with this toxin, they are not going to get sick. The only people that are going to get sick are the humans that consume this toxin. We are the ones that are going to get sick. And then sources and shellfish, and that these shellfish have eaten the algae that are toxic. So once again, they eat algae that are toxic, but not toxic to them, only toxic to us. Purchase from approved suppliers can keep these toxins down. So histamine, seguratoxin, saxitoxin, brevetoxin, and domic acid. So histamine, this is commonly linked to tuna, bonito, mackerel, and mahi-mahi. Initially, you can get a reddening of the face and neck. You can start to have sweats. You can get a headache. You can have a burning or tingling sensation in your mouth or throat. Possibly later on, you can or cannot have these symptoms as well. You could get diarrhea or vomiting or potentially both. Purchase food from approved reputable suppliers and prevent time, temperature abuse during storage and preparation. Keep fish cold at all times. Fish needs to be stored on ice that can self-drain, which means it's in a perforated pan that has holes. So as that water melts, it goes away from the fish. If that fish sits in that water, it can get contaminated. Seguratoxin. So the illness is Sigurida fish poisoning. This is linked to tropical reef fish from the Pacific Ocean, Western Indian Ocean, and the Caribbean Sea. So barracuda, grouper, jacks, and snapper. For these symptoms, you can get reversal of hot and cold sensations. So you can be hot, cold, along with nausea or vomiting. You can get tingling in your fingers, lips, and toes. And then you can have joint or muscle pain. Purchase these tropical predatory fish from approved reputable suppliers, not from someone off the side of the road. Saxitoxin. So this is paralytic shellfish poisoning, or PSP. This is found in colder waters, so New England coast, clams, oysters, mushrooms, or mussels and scallops. Numbness, tingling in the face, arms, and legs. Dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, and vomiting. Buy it from approved suppliers. Best way to prevent this illness. Brevetoxin, so neurotoxic shellfish poisoning, or NSP. So shellfish in warmer waters, so off the coast of Florida, Gulf of Mexico, and Caribbean Sea. Clams, mussels, and oysters. Tingling, numbness in lips, tongue, or throat. Dizziness, reversal of those hot and cold symptoms again. Vomiting and diarrhea. Buy from approved suppliers. Domic acid, so amnesic shellfish poisoning, so ASP, commonly found in coastal waters off the Pacific Northwest and coast of Canada, and it's clams, mussels, oysters, and scallops. Initially, you could have vomiting, diarrhea, and abdominal pain, and possibly later on, you could have confusion, memory loss, disorientation, you can have seizures, you could possibly go into a coma, and possibly death. So once again, buy from approved suppliers. You do not want any of these symptoms happening to you. So buy it from a reputable seafood provision. They know what they can sell, where they buy it from, how long they bought it from these certain vendors. They have everything in order. Mushroom toxins. Foodborne illnesses linked to mushrooms are caused by eating wild toxic mushrooms. Because there are some mushrooms that are good to eat, and there are some mushrooms that are bad to eat. These are the bad ones. They occur when toxic mushrooms are mistaken for edible ones, and they can be prevented from getting sick if you buy from approved suppliers. Plant toxins usually happen when plants are purchased from unapproved suppliers. They can happen when certain plants aren't cooked correctly, so undercooked kidney beans. And they can be prevented from buying, by purchasing plants from approved reputable suppliers.